welcome everybody to our 8th session, Google Hangout session. Today we have two guests, Solange Dane and Catherine de Rijt from the law faculty. They will talk later on a little bit on the role of the tutor. Danielle and I will first reflect. Yeah, she's sitting a little bit in the corner. She'll come into the picture when she starts talking. We'll talk a little bit about reflections on the assignments. I'll first go through assignment 3, where Herco did look at. So he wrote some of his reflections down, and then Danielle will go into track 2 and will also summarize a little bit the remarks of Amber, who couldn't join this session. And then we'll go to track 1, where Catherine and Solange will also reflect on the role of the tutor. So if we look at track 3, there were 12 assignments, and it shows that the teams focused on change management and on factors contributing to successful introduction of PBL. It was noted that the PBL implementation requires a systematic approach and starting from the people side of the change. For instance, teachers, tutors, and students should be trained and understand the benefits of PBL, and the institution should recognize innovation and excellence in teaching. The Learn Together team, so one specific team, shared experiences of introducing PBL in Recife 10 years ago. Initial attempts to simply copy the steps were not sufficient, so the principles had to become embedded in the DNA of the organization. Or, as another team quoted John Tech, to take responsibility for student learning ultimately means not just to promote learning for students, but to model it by becoming a learning organization. And other groups also focused on implementation issues in specific countries, or specific regions, like Asia and the Middle East. So we hope to see that some of you will follow the example of the teachers from Recife and use the discussion board, so the general one, not only your group space, to share your experience of implementing change during the final weeks of this MOOC. So this is something we look forward to, and we hope that all of you can react on these contributions. Those were very briefly, the observations of Herco, and I'll now give the floor to Danielle to reflect a little bit.
So I've looked at some assignments in track 2, and I saw that some of you have taken a fairly traditional PBL approach of brainstorming, formulating questions, and then answering. And some of those assignments have very valuable lessons learned about how you set up a PBL course outline, what are quality criteria. Some of the teams have also described step by step what they would do as a procedure, and that's very helpful, I think. There's also a number of teams who have developed course outlines or collected examples from course outlines and discussed those. I saw one team where each of the 7 team members had made a first concept of a course outline in their own domain, ranging from primary school to engineering and higher education. And then they discussed those and drew some conclusions from those discussions. There's other teams have collaboratively worked on 1 or 2 examples of course outlines. There's some really very valuable and inspiring material in those assignments. So I would also recommend you to look at the assignments of other teams. Some of the discussions and some of the learning questions were around issues of if I design a PBL course, should I only do PBL sessions, or do I mix PBL with lectures, or can I do a 50-50% mix of traditional learning and PBL? There were discussions about how long should cases be. There were discussions about how much self-study time do students need. In the end, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for those aspects. We typically have 2 cases a week, but I've also seen examples in the literature where students have a new PBL case every day, and they spend the first and the last hour of the day with their tutor, and in between they study. So that's a very structured way of doing PBL. In other situations, one PBL case can last over several weeks, with more or less tutor guidance in between. Mixing PBL and other methods, there are, I think, very few places in the world where there's pure PBL, only PBL cases and nothing else. Most places mix in some lectures, some skills training. I'd say in Maastricht, our general position would be that if you do that too much, you create a more passive attitude in students that might harm your PBL processes. But we also have lectures and skills trainings in our courses. Another thing that many teams did, because this week's task referred to the lecture of Jeroen van Marienboer about the 4CID model. Some of you have tried to apply that model. And it's actually quite interesting because this model was not originally developed in the context of problem-based learning. It's a model to design learning for complex tasks. Since Jeroen van Marienboer joined this university a number of years ago, we have been applying this model as well. And I'd say the most valuable lessons that we've drawn are that we try to, within a curriculum, we try to raise the complexity and lower the amount of support that students have, so that there's not only development in the difficulty of the content, but there's also a development in the independence of students, the way that they can self-direct the learning, the way that they can partly find their own resources or fully find their own learning resources, to make that a trajectory rather than having the same format from day one to the end of the curriculum. I'd like to end this reflection by pointing out to you that there's been one very creative contribution of a team that developed a survival guide for first-time PBL course design developers. Go and have a look. I'll briefly continue with some reflections of Amber, who kept an eye on discussion fora and summarized some of her main observations. There's a lot of discussion about theory and practice about problem-based learning. And in this MOOC, of course, we provide some theory, some background, and some assignments. Some people have argued that it's also just about starting to do PBL, to see how it works, to collect feedback, and see how it works for you in your own setting. And that is something that we are not doing very much of in this MOOC because it's the wrong kind of platform. But I have heard from one of our observers that there is a team where some of the members decided to just try out with a group of students what a PBL case would work like. And one of them acted as the tutor and others were observers, and then they discussed how it went. I think that's a very nice option. There are also a number of people who have posted a draft of a PBL project on the forum asking for feedback from others in the course. So please go and have a look in the discussion forum of track 2, I think, in this stage, and react to what others have proposed. There's also somebody who shared resources, for instance, on the 7 principles of effective case design, or a number of other valuable resources too. Finally, Amber saw that there was some discussion about inconsistencies in the NovoEd platform, where the participation levels are scored, but this is inconsistent. Yes, this is true, and we have let the NovoEd platform people know. So if you see a score for 40 or 60% participation or something like that, yes, we know it's not trustworthy, but it's out of our reach to solve that at this particular moment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now to track 1. So I had a look at the assignments, and it seems you all kind of have the impression that the tutor should be a super person, because they should activate, they should make sure that the group works, they should be trained well. So that's the reason why we asked some expert tutors to join this Google Hangout, and they will go into kind of the role the tutor has, what kind of training they have, and hopefully answer some of your questions. So I suggest you give a brief introduction, and we'll continue just asking questions and go on.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you. I'm Catherine Rijt, and I work at the Faculty of Law, and I'm an educationalist. So what I do is I train our tutors to become good PBL tutors, and I also give them guidance. I coach them next to other activities. And I brought with me a very experienced tutor, Solange Dane, and she's really appreciated by the board and by students for her approach, her PBL approach. So she can give you very good examples of how she works with students and what effects it has on students and on their learning process. So Geraldine told us that you think that the tutor has to be a superman, a superwoman, and that's true. That's true. I think to both agree on that one. That's definitely true.
But you can be a super person.
Indeed. I think you always have to keep in mind that when you think about the role of the tutor, that working student-centered, that's one of the fundamental ideas about PBL. And when you keep that in mind as a tutor, I think you're always right.
Yes, yes.
Maybe we can discuss some concrete examples about the role of the tutor, and then we can show you how we see that, how we work, how we work student-centered. Maybe the example of, is it always a tutor that has to give the summary? For example, at the end of the discussion of a task, is it then the tutor who has to give the summary of what has been said, the summary of the discussion? It might be tempting, it might have an advantage to do so, because then you as a tutor, you are sure that you are giving the summary that you want to give, that is the right summary. However, I think that is a false feeling of...
Well, I don't think you should do it like that, because then you're putting something into the group that's not theirs, but it's yours.
Yes.
And I made sometimes I really did it, because there was something not really great about what they all told, and it was not everything was true. So I said, well, I give a summary, and then I corrected some things, but it doesn't work because students don't notice it. They don't notice that you're telling something else. Mm-hmm. And yourself, you are satisfied. You think, well, I've told them, so now they know it, but it's not right.
No.
But that's not the point, that you never should give a summary. I use it sometimes as a reward. When they really had a good, they spoke about their learning goals and it was really a good level, then I sometimes use it as a reward, and then they can check, was it right what we all did? Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, I really think the best thing is to let them summarize themselves.
Yes, and why is it? Because of course, you as a tutor, you want to check whether your students are with you or not. Have they really understood the subject matter? Have they really followed the discussion with the other students, with their peers? And when you give the summary, you're not checking it. When you let them give the summary, then you're really checking whether they're with you or not.
Yes. Can I ask a follow-up question? Because when I'm what do you do when the students have not fully discussed everything that they should have discussed?
Mm-hmm.
I tell them so.
What do you say? How do you state that?
But sometimes they're ready and they say, let's go on. And I'm sorry, but was this it? Oh, yes, was there something wrong? I said, really, I'm sorry, but you didn't reach at all the level that you should reach. And then they say, why? And then I pose some questions. For example, do you know this or do you know that? Because what you had to study, this information was in the books, was in everything, and I haven't heard it. So I think you should go back to the case and make new learning goals. So you reach the level you have to reach. Sometimes the tutor makes the mistake. He's going to tell, or she is going to tell, what was missing part. But it's an illusion because they won't notice it. They just listen at you, and it's not PBL. You really could do a lecture.
Yeah.
So the tutor isn't satisfied of the level of the group, of the knowledge, and then thinks, well, I have to level them up, but I'm going to do it myself. Mm-hmm. And it's an illusion.
And the danger of such an approach is that you are rewarding the students for not doing their job. So next time,
they know.
Why should they prepare themselves? Because they know that you're going to do exactly the same.
The tutor is going to do it.
So why should we do something extra? So I think that's really a pitfall where you can step in as a tutor. So you don't have to do that.
Because it also relates to a discussion they are having about should the tutor be an expert or not? And if you say, okay, you have to check whether they summarize everything they should know, you need some kind of expertise in the material in order to know. So what's your reflection on that one?
Well, it depends on, first, I think it's quite a lot easier if you are an expert, because then you notice everything, you know everything about it. Now at this moment, I'm doing a course of criminal law, and I like it very much. So that's so easy to be a tutor. But sometimes that's not possible, and then you're not an expert. But you can always ask. And I'm at that, well, first of all, you have your instruction, so you know what the goals are. But on the other hand, every time when I could pose a question like a student, there's something left. So I can ask at that moment that question, whether or not I don't know the answer. And sometimes they really think I'm like a tutor and I'm an expert and I'm just teasing them by posing questions. But sometimes I don't know the answer either. Mm-hmm. But it's not up to me to know the answer. It's up to them. So I ask them the question, and when they pick it up, they make a learning goal and they will find out. Mm-hmm. So that's my opinion about that. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be an expert to be a good tutor. Mm-hmm. No.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's also really important that students formulate their own learning goals, and that you work with those learning goals. That's also a part of working student-centered. And that brings us to an important skill of a tutor, asking good questions and asking questions effectively. Really important, and you have to do it as a tutor. However, you also have to keep in mind that students have to ask questions to each other, because then you have group dynamics. When you as a tutor only ask questions to the students and then you are waiting for a reaction, of course, then you're stimulating students. And of course, that's also an interesting approach. However, for me, this is not PBL, because it is not student-centered, then it is tutor-centered, because you are the one who's thinking where you want to bring them, and you are the one who are asking the questions. And for me, working student-centered,
it's a pitfall, how you know, Catherine, we talked about it a lot of times, also in the trainings, because sometimes I assist Catherine in her trainings about pitfalls, and this is one, because you are sitting there and you are a teacher in some way, but you have to be in the role of a tutor. And sometimes students ask something and you would like to answer it, but you shouldn't. At that moment, it's very difficult not to answer, but just look at the other way or another student and ask another student, do you know? Please pose the question to the others. And when students get used to it, they know they can ask you whatever they like, but you will look at the other students and ask them to give the answer. And so it's an attitude you have to train, and it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. But when they're used to it, the students, That's also because when you, sometimes they were in a group for 7 weeks with a tutor who gave the answers. And you notice right away, because they come in and they ask you the question and you look the other side and have something like, but what's this? But on the other side, you also notice that sometimes they have been in my group for 7 weeks and they go to another teacher and they're used to asking questions to each other. And then there's a tutor and he's going to answer. And they don't like it. Students don't like it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but it's difficult.
Indeed, as a tutor, you always have to strike a balance. On the one hand, there is the group dynamics, and you have to let the group do a thing. But on the other hand, you have to intervene.
Sometimes.
And finding that balance is not always easy. But that's, I think, if you can achieve that, then you are already that superwoman and or that superman in PBL.
Yeah.
What I would like to also discuss is the importance of training students in PBL, but definitely also training your tutors who are going to teach in PBL. And of course, new staff members, they have to be trained. They have to know what is PBL, and not only what is PBL in general, but how are you in your faculty, in your educational institution, how are you working with PBL? So in our training sessions for new staff members, we are talking about general ideas and fundamental ideas about PBL, but also about our educational philosophy of our faculty. So how are we implementing PBL? Next to that, we are training our staff members in specific skills they need to acquire as a tutor. For example, asking good questions, but also giving feedback, time management, and also a large part of our training session is what Solange already mentioned, those typical pitfalls in PBL. How are you going to deal with them? And we also take a lot of time to simulate. So we simulate tutorials so that tutors can experience with the role of the tutor in a safe environment. And then we are giving feedback to each other. We also simulate those pitfall situations, and then we are discussing in which ways you can react as a tutor. Next to that, next to the training sessions for new staff members, is also really important that you have tutor meetings weekly. Yeah. So all tutors of a course, they come together weekly and they discuss how they are approaching students, how they are approaching the learning methods in that course. And that's also really important.
Yes, also the problems. There's a lot of times that some tutors have some problems in their groups, and it's important that we all have the same way of handling that, because you should be one front for the students. It's what they're used to. So there's always some time to talk about the information of the course and problems in the course, but also time to talk about these pitfalls and problems tutors had during their groups.
Yes, it's not only good for the team building between the tutors, but definitely
yes, and also brainstorming about a problem some tutor has. We can talk about it, and everyone can put on some experience.
Yeah.
So yes.
So I think you will agree with me that you can all become that superwoman or that superman and be a good PBL tutor.
Yes, and if you have more questions, you can discuss those on the discussion forum. And I've seen that many of you have tutor experience. And one of the best things, I think, of the tutor meetings is that when you do encounter a difficult group or a specific problem, you can discuss it with fellow tutors, and they always have more answers than you can try out.
Thank you both for joining us in this Google Hangout. I think it's very useful to get your perspective and your experience with this. So I hope it also helps, especially the ones in track 1, of course. But you're now doing all the same environment. I think it's also inspiring for those who have been working on the other tracks. As you see, we're not so good in directing our screen, and you probably enjoyed more the sun that was shining here than you saw the faces but I think especially the content was the most important. Looking forward to seeing you all in the final Google Hangout session next week.
With Jeroen van Marienboer and one of the MOOC students who will be joining us.
Okay, bye.
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 Bye-bye.